Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Jeffrey Shaw. I will tell you all about Jeffrey in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the courage we exert. And when you do it as a leader, you do it to bring people together for a common cause. Welcome, Jeffrey Shaw.
Hey, John, thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here with you.
Great. I want to tell folks all about you. And I think your claim to fame is that you've never worked for anyone else. So we're going to get into that. And you are a door-to-door salesman at 14 and a lifetime of self-employment. I love it. You're a speaker and small business consultant, and you help self-employed and small businesses get a better sense of self and grow and profit and all that. You have a TEDx talk from Lincoln Square that is on TED.com, which is way cool. So congratulations on that. We're going to focus, and you're also a host of a top-rated podcast called The Self-Employed Life. And you're author of a couple of books. The newer of one is The Self-Employed Life, Business and Personal Development Strategies that Create Sustainable Success. Welcome, Jeffrey Shaw.
I'm excited to talk to you about all this.
Great. Now, you write, every self-employed person has to answer the same question. Why did I go into business for myself? And as you say, it's always a variant of to control my destiny. Yet, I'm one who's self-employed, and sometimes we feel we have no control. We're sort of floating on the waves like flotsam and jetsam. So what's your perspective on that, Jeffrey? Do we have control? Explain that.
So yeah, that thought, and it actually was the impetus for writing the book, The Self-Employed Life, because for years, having been self-employed my whole life, when I met other self-employed people, I was just always curious, like, why did you become self-employed? And everybody has some variation of the same answer, which is, to control my destiny, control the hours I work. And I always like saying, so how's that working out for you? And there you go. And everybody laughs like, yeah, it looks nothing like that. And I realized that while that is true, I also felt that I had developed as much of a solution for that as there can be in my decades of self-employment. And it's what I refer to as the self-employed ecosystem. Basically, what I had unpacked is, yes, the world of being self-employed is unpredictable. The world is unpredictable. A pandemic can come along. Who knew? Right? So the life in the world is unpredictable, but the only thing you actually control, we can't control the circumstances of the world around us. The only thing we can control is the environment we create for the results we want. That has everything to do, even my first book, Lingo, which is a brand messaging book, what it really is the environment of words. How do you create the right words, the right energy to attract your ideal clients? The Self-Employed Life book is a bigger picture of that. It's the self-employed ecosystem, right? So no, we can't control the circumstances of the world, but the only thing you can control is that you set up the circumstances and the environment for the results you want. And then to some degree, kind of let it go. You've created the setting. Now it just has to happen.
Now, I want to delve into the self-employed life, but before I do, and I know this happens because I've encountered it. I probably have lived part of it early in my career. And that is most self-employed people do not consider themselves as business people. Agree or not agree? So.
Thankfully, it's changed a bit. I've been in business for 40 years. So I have definitely seen an evolution of people stepping up and realizing that, and mind you, let's back up here a little bit. I come from my original career, as I like to say, was as a family portrait photographer for very affluent families. So, and I do very little photography today, a couple shoots a year, but I built for myself a business where I became the go-to photographer for affluent families in the United States. A very thriving business. So I come from a creative business. Now, I don't think there's anybody that dislikes business more than creative business owners.
Right? That's what I was relating to, because most of the people I know are on that creative bent. And they're also in my field, executive coaches, leadership development, as well as creative types. That's my original background, which is also photography from a long time ago.
Oh,
So
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, so I think there's a dislike for the business side, but I'm glad to see is a lot of people have stepped up to realize that, guess what? If you don't run your business and run it effectively, you don't get to give your gift. Right. So I think a lot of people have woken up into that, because I've definitely seen a progress. But here's the thing, John. So I guess we're coming on about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now. I launched the Self-Employed Business Institute on this very reason. I realized after 15 or so years of coaching people in various industries, they all had one thing in common. They were all really good at what they do, but there are industries where nobody teaches them how to make money at what they do. Those are your coaches. Those are your creatives, speakers. I'm highly trained. Everybody I've ever worked with is highly trained at their skill set and really, really good at it, and struggles to know how to build a business. And I feel like we're all out there reinventing the wheel.
Well, there's a direct link to that, because to the organizational world, when people are elevated to management and leadership positions, they are highly trained in whatever their discipline is, be it science, medicine, accounting, logistics, whatever it is. And all of a sudden they find themselves in a management position. Yeah. And without any real background. So your business lessons have a direct link to teaching what I do, leadership and management skills. So
yeah, 100%. I mean, we often find ourselves in the role, and this is true of self-employed business owners, and it's true of people in management position and leaders, that we often find ourselves in roles that aren't inherently natural to us. So for example, a self-employed person goes into business for all this independence, and their business grows and they realize they need to build a team. They're suddenly an employer. They're independent. The very independent characters that made them want to venture out in the world on their own, that probably makes them not naturally a good employer. It's a skill set that has to be learned, just like management. It's a skill set. I believe that some people, first, good leadership management is learnable. Everybody, you can learn it. Some people have more innate skills of leadership than other people do. Right. But it's often a learned skill that needs to be just supported and guided, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So just getting down to basics, because I think folks who are self-employed, and many in the audience are here. So how is being self-employed different from being in a not your own business?
Yeah, for my one-to-one clients, almost all of them, because it's kind of my specialty, are people that are in corporate that are leaving their corporate positions to become self-employed. So I can see the effect of going from traditional employment to self-employment very clearly. A number of things. I mean, suddenly you become self-employed, your life is compartmentalized. Traditional employment is pretty compartmentalized down to the fact that there are departments. And you have a problem with your computer, you go to the IT department. You become self-employed and you're suddenly running all the departments. So that's a big wake-up call for a lot of people. I think the most significant aspect, I think on the surface, what people think is the biggest difference is that, yes, there is a fine or no line between your business life and your personal life. That is true. But I do hope people have boundaries so they're not working 24/7. Okay. So I don't think that's the biggest issue. Here's what I think is the biggest wake-up call when one becomes self-employed, is that your level of success is proportionate to your level of personal development. When you're self-employed, how much you believe you deserve, how much what the limited mindsets that you weren't aware of because you had an umbrella of protection over you in a salary job suddenly are exposed, right? Your limited mindsets are suddenly exposed when you're self-employed, that you realize that you fear, you fear lack of security, or you fear abundance. I mean, a lot of people have a really hard time stepping into, what if I had it all? How am I going to manage it all? It seems overwhelming. So to me, the biggest and most significant difference is realizing that who you are as a person and how your mindsets and your behaviors have everything to do with your level of success. So to me, anytime I want to raise the success of my business, I first figure out how I need to grow first, so that the capacity of the business can reach my capacity as a person.
Well, I think that those of you who work with on one-on-one or through your business institute, our self-employed business institute, is very valuable because you're addressing something, the mindset, which is really the preparation for it. And because so often when we jump into something like this, there's without preparation. So preparing oneself is so critical. So that's why you're providing a great service. So you have something called the self-employed ecosystem. Tell us what that is and what does it mean?
Yeah. So. And that is, there's a correlation between the ecosystem, the self-employed ecosystem. And as I was saying earlier about setting up the right environment, right? And as we know in a natural ecosystem, if something is off, if there's an invasive species in a natural environment or ocean water temperature being higher than it should be, when something is off in an ecosystem, it runs the risk of killing off the whole ecosystem. That is true in self-employment. However, I always say, I'm not suggesting it's going to kill your business. It could, but here's what I can guarantee. If everything in your self-employed ecosystem isn't operating well, I guarantee you're working harder than you have to. So the self-employed ecosystem consists of the 3 areas of focus when you're self-employed that you need to keep your eye on all 3 and all aspects of all 3. One thing when you're self-employed, you don't really have the luxury of taking your eye off a lot of things, or if you do, your level of success will be proportionate to that. So the 3 parts of focus as self-employed ecosystem are personal development. Again, for all the reasons I said a moment ago, you have to work on your personal development, your limited mindsets, what you need to say to yourself to invite flow and more business. You have to work on that because your level of success is going to be proportionate to what you as a person are prepared to receive and are capable of accomplishing. The second area of focus are the right-sized business strategies. And this is what I spend most of my time teaching, and this is what I spend most of my time in my keynotes talking about. And what I mean by right-sized is that the rest of the world, business world, is transactional based. When you're self-employed, regardless of the industry that you're in, your business is relationship based. Every relationship matters to the point where I like to say, let's bust up the Pareto principle, right? Because the Pareto principle states that 80% of your income comes from 20% of your clients. If we buy into that as self-employed business owners, what that's really saying is we're wasting our time on 8 out of 10 people. We can't afford that. The smaller the business, the less you're able to just glibly say, oh, it's okay if 8 clients don't pay off. We need all the clients to pay off. Yeah. Because we put a lot into it. So we need business strategies that are relationship based, that are connect deeply with our clients, that are right sized. And I find what I've done for 40 years for myself, and I now teach others, what I refer to as translations. And it's almost flipping the rest of the world upside down. Traditional business wants to talk about target marketing. I teach a marketing system called hug marketing. The rest of the world wants to talk about customer service. Like, yeah, customer service just isn't enough. The reason people hire us isn't for good service. They hire us for our expertise. The rest of the traditional business focuses on an income-based business model, makes their decisions based on income. We need to make our business decisions on impact. So I teach an impact-based business model, because when you're self-employed or a small business, there are many times you're putting effort and attention into something that is your future, but the income hasn't risen to it yet. If you make your decisions from ROI, you give up.
Now, what I've noticed, and I know early in my career, I have been victim of this, and it's the bright, shiny object, or, oh, yes, I can do that, but should I do that? In other words, we're being stretched in areas that we really shouldn't be involved in, not because we cannot do it, but because it takes our eye off our core expertise. How do you counsel that, Jeffrey?
Yeah. No. I'm always leery when something becomes trite and be thrown in the butt. And as a creative business owner, I have such an aversion to people suggesting I can't focus. Or if you look if you look at just business in general, how often do we hear the message that it's so hard to get your message through nowadays in marketing because humans have a shorter attention span. I don't think it's that I don't think we have devolved as a human species to have less of an attention span. The problem is that we have a lot more choices as to where to put our attention. I don't think we've become attention deficient. I think we've become attention snobs. Because we have a lot of choices.
That's an interesting.
Netflix has no problem keeping our attention, right? Because of what they provide. So, I think, John, part of it is almost maybe even to an unhealthy amount, but I try to take personal responsibility for everything that I can. I don't blame the customers. I don't blame the market. I don't blame the way the world has changed. I look at it as, what can I do to meet that new situation? Because the world is uncontrollable. So how can I adjust and meet the new world?
And Jeffrey, that's a very valid point. I like that. It's I'm going to use the word, you may not like it. It's a very customer centric, very customer service oriented approach. Totally. But what I'm talking about is, so go back to your photography days, and I don't know, you were an expert portrait photographer. What if somebody said, hey, could you do our wedding? What did you say?
Oh, I didn't. No, but but here's an important distinction. I had it let's talk about niche marketing, right? So we're talking about focus, because you can look at focus a couple different ways. And I think what you're suggesting is focus in, your niche, which can work beautifully for a lot of businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And for just as many, perhaps even more nowadays, it doesn't work so well, or at least the traditional definition of niche. Because I had as niche of a business as anybody can have. I photographed wealthy families in color at their homes. I didn't mix it up with black and white, and I didn't do anything else. No weddings, nothing else.
Yeah.
That was the 80s and 90s, and it worked beautifully. But this is 2023, right? It's a different business. If look at the businesses that were so highly specialized, and then a pandemic came along, and at the risk of just wiping out your industry. So I believe today, not just in having a portfolio business model, but what I refer to as a business model of multiples. Here's the important distinction. The difference is, instead of the niche being about the one thing you can do for one audience, the niche is to really own your area of expertise. It's as if the niche is in you, for which there are likely multiple audiences that can certainly benefit from that expertise, and you can execute that expertise in various ways. And today, just look at the number of ways that you can get your message of expertise out in the world. Can you imagine if you had to just pick one?
No, that's very good. Yeah. I can tell, Jeffrey, you are such an entrepreneur, because I'm pretty sure you don't understand the meaning of the word no, in the sense of as it applies to business and as it applies to marketing and things like that. Why not? So you have this spark in you about that. We have been talking about self-employed, but you also work with small businesses. So going back to that example of photography or whatever it was, and you were asked to do a wedding, would it ever have made sense for you to expand and hire those who could do that? Did that ever make sense to you?
Absolutely. So one of the, and I wish I could credit whoever I heard this, because it truly is the best piece of business advice I've been carrying with me for decades. And it is that for every problem you solve, you introduce a new problem. Right? And we see that in business. Like, every problem you solve, you introduce a new problem. What that suggests to me is we can decide what to do about the new problem we've created. We can either expand our services to fix that as well. We can perhaps delegate it or refer to somebody else who has that expertise, or we can just drop the ball and say, sorry, I created this new problem for you. I can't help you. Hopefully that's not the choice. So what I did is, in that case, I was very clear, and I was very clear on the reason why I didn't want to stray from anything other than family photography, particularly weddings, is, as I said earlier, I didn't love being an employer. So the last thing I wanted was to employ more people, and in particular, something as critical as a wedding. If a wedding photographer worked for me and it was booked a year in advance, that person could leave, they could get sick, anything could happen. And guess who would be stuck filling in? I have zero interest or skill set in photographing a wedding. So why would I do that? So I looked at it just as I always do, in business, every business decision I've ever made, really, if it comes down to it, is based on how I want to live. And I want to live easy, stress-free, and wherever I want in the world.
That sounds good, all of it. Now that is good. And again, it's knowing your niche and having the discipline to stay with it. But when you're starting out in your business and cash flow is an issue, you're going to be tempted to do things that are outside of what you really want to do. So how do you deal with that, Jeffrey? So,
I don't want to just be glib and say don't, but I will tell you that first of all, the work that most everyone has to do at some stage in their business, and I won't say it's just the startup stage, because I coach people that have been in business for 20 years. And the way I realign their business for the current marketplace is very similar to as if they're just starting out. And it all comes down to, and you're a coach, you know this, almost always the number one thing people need is clarity. The hardest thing to sell as a coach is clarity, because it's completely nebulous and vague, and people don't know the benefits of clarity until they get it. So
I have a solution to that. I have a little plaque. It's called Clarity, 1995. But
yeah, like I said, I mean, it's the thing everybody needs, but it's the hardest thing to sell as a coach. And yet I've seen hands-on the benefit. If I can help people get clear on their core message, why they do what they do, translate that into an outward-facing, clear, compelling brand message that attracts their ideal clients. If they have clear direction where they want to go in their lives, it's that clarity that can help you stay focused on the work you pick and you don't. Because if you stray from that, here's an example. Home Depot, who's made a decision on their business model. Home Depot will never be a boutique store. Mm-hmm. Right? They went super broad, decided they can appeal to everybody. You can't change that. So I don't care how small your business is. If you start thinking that some money is better than no money, you're trapped. It's going to be really hard to get out of that. It's even hard to convince yourself to not need the money anymore because you're living on it. So I say, don't go in that direction. Learn to live a little more poor until you don't have to. The payoff is much greater.
The way you were speaking about the search for clarity, and it resonates with me, is something else you talk about: intentions. Let's say most of us, I think, are well-intentioned, but we get, waylaid. What causes us to get waylaid, and then how do we get back on track, Jeffrey? So
I think this is probably the thing that puzzles people the most about the way my brain works, and it just does, right? And I blame it all on being a photographer, because being a photographer has some very unique attributes. It really does. I mean, and I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, because I clearly was drawn to become a photographer, probably for some innate characteristics of who I am. But doing it for 40 years, I think also trained my brain to think a certain way. And like I say, I see what other people can't see. That's why I think I'm a really good coach. Like I can see in people what they can't see in themselves. I can see the brand message that they can't see in themselves. I can see what the rest of the world wants from that they can't see in themselves. It's based in being a photographer. I can see other people walk right by things. I see something I want to photograph. My brain also thrives in chaos. I see the world in pieces, and I'm always imagining it composed as a whole. So when it comes to intentions, one of the things that, to me, it's kind of like my secret formula is we can get really woo-woo about this stuff. And I'll go there with anybody, but I refer to it as woo-woo in your wallet. What are you going to do with it? Right? So I can get super logical. And intentions is one of those things, because just in setting intentions, having an intention to be successful, having an intention to accomplish your goals is not specific enough for actually to work with the brain. So I teach a specific practice for people to set intentions. I call it the from to format. I want to go from this to that. Okay. Just define what you intend to accomplish in the short term, in the next 6 months, maybe a year. What do you intend to accomplish I want to go from being broke to having more than enough money, or I want to go from being overlooked to being highly recognized. Be super, because that's turning the woo-woo into something concrete. It has to be.
No, and I think that's a very valuable lesson. Jeffrey, that's a very valuable lesson, because I always like to say that coaching doesn't work unless it's specific. And then and the individual being coached can internalize it, how he or she applies to self. So your clarity is very critical. So
yeah, exactly. To me, it's a process, and as you coach yourself, I call it the heaven to earth process. Like we might have to start up here with concepts and ideas and philosophies, but it has to be brought down to a place where it's graspable and actionable. So yeah, it's constantly the work to make it easy for people to take action, and also just the science of the brain. I mean, your brain can't retain fluff; it retains specifics.
Now you have something, because we're focused on self-employed or small businesses, but you have it almost sounds contradictory. So I need you to explain it. The business model of multiples. What is that, and how does it apply to a small business or an individual?
It's actually exactly what I was saying before. It's not contradictory at all. It's about you can build a business model of multiples, doing multiple things for multiple audiences if you're really super clear in your area of expertise, for which you can imagine, once it's sort of like the old visual was 6 inches wide, a mile deep, right? As your niche. Now it's kind of like, maybe 12 inches wide, you bore down, and then you can go miles wide. But you have to get really clear on, just there are people in the world you can think of, Apple, actually, for lack of a more creative example, let's face it, when they first came out, they were known as computers, right? And now they can develop almost anything, and we accept it into the ecosystem of the products they offer. Simon Sinek is a thought leader. We all know what he stands for. He stands for the why, but he has latitude to do a lot of other things because he's built the ability to do that by having a clear platform. So that's what the business model of multiples is, where it is defining what I refer to up to 7. We call them levers, not income streams. You can have up to 7 levers in your business. I find that's the maximum anybody can handle. So it's 7 avenues of your business at the most. 5 is great. Somewhere up to 5 to 7 different, areas of your business for which you can derive an income, but you base the amount of effort and attention you're going to put into it based on the amount of attention you want to give it until the income follows.
So let me be specific. Then I will give you my interpretation of that, as multiples might apply to myself, and I had never thought of it. I do essentially 3 things. I'm an executive coach, I'm an author, and I'm an educator speaker. 3 things. And so would each of those be levers in your parlance?
Yeah, and I would question whether educator or speaker could even be broken up if there's different, because with each lever, there should be a marketing plan to fill that, right? So if the way that you get educational work is different than speaking work, or if education is just a description of the way that you speak, that's up to you now. But this is exactly it. I mean, it's just a matter of, I look at it as a control panel. That's why I call it levers. And this is where it's super valuable. We started off by talking about control. Nothing gives you more control of your business than a business model of multiples if you look at it as levers, because at any moment, for example, in 2020, as a professional speaker, the speaking lever got yanked down, not of my control. But I looked at my business model of multiples. I'm like, okay, well, here's another lever that I haven't been putting as much effort into. Let me crank that up, save the day, right? Completely turn save my business. And in fact, grew my business. So if you look at it as a control panel of levers, you can make the decision. And this is important for a lot of people in some sort of a transition. I've been transitioning out of photography for 15 years. So the lever has been going down, 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 so that the lever of coaching and thought leadership can go up. So it gives you, as I said, as much control as I think anything can in business. If you look at your business model as a control panel of levers.
Jeffrey, we are having a robust conversation, but time is racing along. And you know that I ask every guest a story about grace. Do you have one you'd like to share with us?
Sure. That's such a great question. I mean, first of all, I do believe that we're surrounded with moments of grace, every day, hopefully, or many times. But the story I'll share with you is when I was 16, I was granted a scholarship because I excelled as photography, to attend a summer photography college in Colorado. And while out there, I did what many Coloradians do, which is to climb a 14,000-foot mountain. Now, mind you, in order to get permission to climb a 14,000-foot mountain, and I was in Breckenridge, so I was starting at 9,600 feet altitude, you had to get permission from the town. You had to register you're hiking this mountain. So we had clearance to go. Got to the top of the mountain, and an unexpected thunderstorm came in, swept in, to the point where the lightning was horizontal from the altitude. We were just below the summit. It's more of at that altitude, it was more like an electrical field. It was purple. The only thing we could do was, and I was with 3 other hikers, we had to crawl on our hands and feet because you don't want your chest to make connection to the earth with that much electricity. And the only thing visible was a metal shack. So we went towards the metal shack, which seems stupid, except inside the metal shack was a wooden picnic bench. So I imagined it was there for a reason. So the 4 of us huddled on the picnic bench to survive and wait out the storm. 2 other hikers, not of our hiking party, but 2 other hikers were killed, and a herd of 60 elk were killed in that storm, by which they eventually had to send up. They couldn't get helicopters in, but they eventually sent up these big machinery to pick us up. An absolute moment of grace because for all intents and purposes, it's amazing we survived it.
That is an extraordinary story and a life-saving story, and maybe saved by a picnic table, if I might say so.
Picnic table in a metal shed. It seemed logical. I don't know.
Well, it's a contrast in life there, and then fortunately you survived and thrived. So, Jeffrey, it's been a delight speaking to you. How can people find you?
Absolutely, you can go to jeffreyshaw.com. That's my main website. The Self-Employed Business Institute, if you're in need of the support, is selfemployedbusinessinstitute.com. But if you go to jeffreyshaw.com, you'll find your way to that and a bunch of free stuff that I offer.
Great. And we always put that URL in the notes. So, Jeffrey, it has been such a pleasure to speak to you today. And with that, we will go out.
Thank you so much.